Humanity often pays the price for knowledge. When it comes to history, most of the progress of understanding left behind terrible acts. Psychology isn't the exception. While some famous experiments were successful, others have left their participants with lifelong psychological issues. Today, we'll be giving a look to the top 10 most unethical experiments in psychology. Number 10. Emma Eckstein. Emma Eckstein was a 27-year-old woman who sought Sigmund Freud's help for stomach ailments and slight depression. Nevertheless, the Austrian doctor decided to use her for experiments. Freud told Emma that she was being treated for hysteria and excessive masturbation. In one of the treatments, Emma was only given cocaine and local anesthesia before the inside of her nose was cauterized. Freud treated Emma for 3 years, and even nowadays, no one clearly understands his intentions with the young woman. Number 9. Electroshock therapy on children. Dr. Loretta Bender spent most of the 1960s treating children with electroshock therapy in the Creedmoor Hospital. Bender chose her patients by applying a bit of pressure to the children's head, and if one of them moved, then she would count him as a schizophrenic. She believed that the therapy would be a revolutionary help for those with social issues. Anyway, witnesses assured that she never showed sympathy towards the children. The youngest victim of her therapies was a 3-year-old boy. Number 8. The Aversion Project. Dr. Aubrey Levin was in charge of curing homosexuals during the apartheid in South Africa. Thousands of homosexuals were imprisoned and subjected to electroconvulsive aversion therapy to reorientate them. The therapy consisted in showing them pictures of naked men, and they were told to fantasize before being subjected to several shocks. After apartheid, Levin left South Africa to avoid being named an abuser of human rights. He immigrated to Canada and currently works in a teaching hospital. Number 7. The monkey drug trials. In 1969, scientists wanted to study drugs behavior, so they began an experiment with animals. Monkeys were trained to inject themselves with aggressive drugs, and they were left alone to wait for the effects. Obviously, poor monkeys crazed and most of them died. Number 6. Bobo doll experiment. In 1960s, Dr. Albert Bandura decided to study how children learn behavior, so he took 72 children and a plastic doll he called Bobo, and he made the children watch a video in which Bobo was terribly abused, and then he left each child alone with Bobo, just to watch that lots of the children started to abuse Bobo too. He tried the experiment twice. Number 5. Again, monkeys. Harry Harlow studied depression using monkeys that had already bonded with their mothers, but weren't older enough to grow apart from them. He took the monkeys away from their mothers and imprisoned them. Obviously, the poor monkeys began to feel sad and most of them died because they refused to eat. The worst part of this experiment is that he proved nothing new. It was a common sense result. Number 4. The Monster Study. In 1939, 22 orphans became the test subjects of Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor, two researchers of the University of Iowa. The children were divided into groups. Members of one group received the positive speech therapy, unlike the other group, which received negative speech therapy. In the end, the members of the second group developed speech problems for the rest of their lives. Johnson and Tudor never published their results of the experiment. Number 3. Unnecessary sexual reassignment. David Peter Reimer's penis was accidentally maimed during a routine circumcision when he was 7 months old. Dr. John Money was a psychologist studying the idea that gender was learned. He convinced David's parents to reassign him as a female. Dr. Money continued to report that the reassignment was successful, even though David insisted all his life that he never identified himself as a female and committed suicide at 38. Number 2. Stanford Prison Experiment. It took place in August 1971. The purpose of the experiment was to study the cases of conflict between prisoners and those who guard them. 24 male students were assigned the roles of guard or prisoner, and it ended up in the guards taking their role too far by torturing and abusing the prisoners. The abusive behavior of the ones who played guards stopped 6 days after the experiment was completed. Number 1. MKUltra. The US government started a series of experiments to find out which was the best way to manipulate citizens. The experiments were called Project MKUltra and were officially sponsored by the CIA. Each experiment involved subjecting unknowing Americans to things like mind-altering drugs, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, extreme isolation, hypnosis, and other forms of torture. Subjects were found at universities and in hospitals and prisons.